It's 12 minutes past the hour. Our meteorologist Travis has stepped into the booth, and I know what you're all saying. 12 past the hour. The weather people are always there at 8 past the hour. What has happened? Well, we're not going to be hearing the weather forecast right now. We're actually going to try to learn something from the weather department, something more than usual.
Yeah, we're going to try.
Okay. And, the winter, sooner or later, it's going to end, folks, I can assure you. Happens every year. But summer is coming, and eventually the most interesting kind of storm, it seems to me, to the media, beyond these blizzards we've been having, are hurricanes. And so I want to learn something about them before they happen. And I guess the first question has to be a very simple question, is how would you define a hurricane? What is a hurricane?
Okay, well, hurricanes, as you said, are the most interesting type of storms to media, and that could be because hurricanes are like the mother of all storms. They bring heavy rains and floods, tornadoes, winds, and storm surge. So basically, a hurricane is just a giant system that forms over the water and causes billions of dollars in loss of property and life and all over the world.
And another thing that I think appeals to the media about them, at least I've noticed this, is that they seem to be able to follow them for a long time. That it's out there. It's like a monster in the dark, and it's coming at you.
Yeah, and that monster comes from, usually, they can track these storms from forming off the coast all the way over in Africa. They come from the warm desert areas in Africa, and once that hot air moves over the ocean, it gets things going. It fires up thunderstorms, and then they get a rotation, and they form what pretty much everyone knows is the eye of a hurricane, and those hurricanes just take their sweet time traveling across the Atlantic, affecting the Caribbean, and sometimes sweeping up into the Gulf Coast or the East Coast of the U.S.
Now, you mentioned the eye of a hurricane. What is it, the eye? How does it form? I mean, here's this big darn storm, and apparently there's this little, my sense of this, having listened to people, is that there's this little zone in the center that is a relatively calm place. How does that form?
Well, it's still being researched, but basically you have all these storms that circle around each other, and in the middle of the storm is an area where there's pretty much nothing going on. You have thunderstorms that are really fast moving up or rising columns of air, and then what goes up must come down somewhere, so they sink into the middle of the storm, and that clears everything out. So for the eye, it's relatively calm, but once you move away from the eye, that's where you get the big damage for hurricanes.
Right, so indeed, is it fair to say that the worst conditions in a hurricane tend to surround that little calm place?
Yeah, and interesting enough, if a hurricane hits land, wherever the eye makes landfall, they receive less damage than somewhere about maybe 20 miles northeast of the eye, where that's where all the wind and the storm surge comes up and causes the most damage.
So on average, the northeastern part of a storm that might affect the United States is the most damaging part.
Yes, it is.
Now, I've heard about this storm surge, which seems to be a big problem for the folks at the coastline. What is the storm surge, and why? How does it manifest itself?
Okay, well, a hurricane is a very deep, low-pressure storm. That low pressure just pretty much lifts up the ocean water, and you get storm surge when it comes near land because the coast becomes less deep, and that water has to go somewhere. So the winds wrapping around a hurricane, they push all the coastal water up towards the coast, and it can go several miles inland, flooding areas several feet, up to 20 feet in some locations.
That sounds messy.
It's very messy, yeah.
It also seems to me that I hear when these hurricanes are approaching, when the monster is emerging from the dark, they say these things are unpredictable, they have a mind of their own, kind of thing. What makes the path of hurricanes so apparently difficult to predict?
That's a tough question. Well, A lot of science goes into predicting the path of the hurricanes, and to get a rough idea, you can just look at past storms over the last 50 years or so, because they tend to form in certain locations at certain times of the year, and then you can, if you see a current hurricane forming, you can predict where it's going to go looking at past storms on their past tracks. But mostly, it's the steering winds. If you have a big weather system in the U.S., it's going to block any type of hurricane that comes by, and it's going to shoot it off into sea. However, if you have a big high pressure in the U.S., it tends to drag it in on closer to the Gulf Coast.
Okay, so it seems as though that the difficulty in prediction has mostly to do with the kind of systems that are surrounding the hurricane?
Yes.
Now, you said they occur elsewhere in the world. Where else in the world? I tend to hear about them around here. Where else are they very common?
Well, they're very common where you have large bodies of water, and the other main place is in the Pacific Ocean, and those, well, they don't call them hurricanes in the Pacific. They actually go by a different name, but it's the same storm. They call them typhoons over there, and those tend to go affect places such as Japan, and then you can also get some hurricanes that are in the southern hemisphere, which spin in the opposite direction and affect places such as Australia.
How big is a hurricane?
Well, hurricanes can be as big as they want to be, basically. They can range from...
That's frightening.
Yes, it is frightening,
like
because that's why they are the mother of all storms.
It's like the Incredible Hulk.
Yes. Well, the storms can range from hundreds of miles across to thousands of miles across, and really the core of the storm is relatively small, but the reason why they're the most dangerous and destructive storms is because that damage is across a very, very large distance. And we can go into the strength of hurricanes. They go on a scale from categories 1 to 5, and 5 being the Incredible Hulk of the storm that can have wind speeds of upwards of 150 miles per hour.
Well, you just want to stay away. You don't want to get involved with stuff like that.
Definitely not.
Okay. Well, we've gotten at least a little primer here on hurricanes and how they form and how they work, and so we're going to be prepared to watch the media lose their cool when they approach. Thanks very much, Travis. Slowly become less and less, even though the temperature may have been below freezing the whole time. And I've always wondered, how does that snow disappear?
That's a great question. I'm always so sad to see the snow go, and I'm sure you are too. Well, not anymore, not in March, but
right.
In January, if the temperature stays around or below freezing, the snow doesn't stay at the same depth because of a couple of reasons. First off, the sun. When the sun comes out, it has an impact on the snow, and really, the other thing is compression. Over time, the snow just, especially right after a storm, the snow just compresses down to less than it was right when it fell. But the sun is also a big thing. You'll notice sometimes that even though the temperature is below freezing, you'll see wetness on the side of the road from where the snow is melting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be above freezing for some melting to occur.
Well, there you have it, folks. We're now prepared for next winter. If something falls out of the sky, we know what it is and how it got there. Thanks very much.
No problem. Have a good day, friend.
All in favor of making a little moolah from time to time. Thank you very much, Billy, for giving us at least a little insight into long-range forecasting.